Hello and welcome back to the latest episode of the Agenda podcast here on the Blood Red channel. I'm your host Edward Kay and I'm joined today by Keifer MacDonald. And sadly, the subject today is just how poor Liverpool have been away from home this season. I'm going to quickly rattle through the games. We drew to Fulham away, first game of the season, lost to United at Old Trafford, drew away at Goodison, which is maybe a bit more excusable, and then followed by losses away to Arsenal and obviously on Saturday, a loss against newly promoted and were then bottom of the league, Nottingham Forest. Keifer, has it now gone beyond the point where you can pick up on individual factors behind individual results and games? And is it sort of, emblematic of the Reds really having some struggles away from home?
Yeah, definitely. I think it kind of sums up Liverpool's season so far. I think, there's, in each game they've played, it feels like there's been a different problem. I mean, yesterday, obviously, you had the kind of injuries to Thiago or the ear infection, and then obviously Darwin Núñez still feeling his hamstring from the game against West Ham, and obviously they weren't able to play. And I think, whilst Liverpool have plenty of chances to win it, I think obviously their absence can kind of be overlooked, as well as, you're looking at Diogo Jota not playing, Luis Diaz, Ibrahim Konate or a Joel Matip kind of in there as well. So it feels like, Liverpool, I mean, the longer the season goes on, obviously you do feel like there is underlying problems, but it feels like every time they play, there is issues that are kind of, whether it be injuries or other factors. But yesterday was obviously, I don't know why, I kind of didn't have a great feeling going into it. As you say, they were bottom of the table. Obviously, Liverpool haven't won there in the Premier League year. I think that's now 6 games at Forest, and they haven't won. But I mean, just the manner of the defeat, I think especially when Van Dijk misses that chance in the first half, I think everyone kind of fears the worst if you're not kind of taking those chances. And, maybe confidence is low. I mean, we've seen in the past kind of, how good he is aerially. And, to kind of look to nod that across to Firmino instead of, going for himself, you kind of thought, oh, here we go again. And then obviously, fair play to Forest. I thought they kind of set up well and they kind of had a plan and kind of what Liverpool did to City last week in terms of, just absorbing that pressure. And then obviously they kind of hit us on the break and secured the 3 points. But like you say, it's got past that point now of where you can maybe, the game at Fulham, Thiago goes off injured. The game at Old Trafford, again, it's a bit of a mismatch midfield. I think it's Henderson, Elliott, Milner. And then obviously, like you say, the draw at Goodison, I think we've only won there once or twice under Klopp now. So that's more excusable. But obviously now, I think obviously it's 2 points from 15 on the road this season. And I think I looked before and I think Liverpool won 13 of their 19 on the road last season, which was obviously, as well as your home form being key, taking points off your rivals, which Liverpool didn't actually do, greatly last year, obviously. They drew at Tottenham, they drew at Chelsea, obviously they beat United. But, kind of having that solid base of winning near enough all the games outside of their top 6 away games kind of gave them that kind of cushion. And obviously, yes, they fell short in their kind of Premier League title pursuit, but, they were there or thereabouts. But I think this season now, like I say, 2 points from 15, they've not won away yet, have they? So it's certainly a cause for concern.
Yeah, you mentioned the injuries, and obviously I just want to zero in on that. It was a bit of a shock to open up Twitter when I woke up and see that obviously Thiago was out with an ear infection, and it just sort of seemed to kick us while we're down. We've got plenty of players out already, but yesterday's defeat in particular, obviously after such a good week, basically following the Rangers game, obviously beating City after that and West Ham and looking to make it 3 wins on the bounce in the Premier League. How much can yesterday's defeat in particular be put down to injury struggles rather than away struggles?
I think it's difficult because obviously the kind of longer the season goes on, it feels like you're always, back referencing injuries and people being missing, which is, all well and proper and obviously a fair enough excuse. But, the history books won't say that in 5-10 years time. And if Liverpool fail to qualify for the Champions League, it isn't going to be like, oh, well, they had injuries. It's going to be a failure of a season. So I think, whilst, like we said, Diaz was missing, obviously Núñez, Thiago, obviously Fabinho's not playing at the level that we've expected of him. Konate, Matip, they weren't there either. It is worrying, but at the same time, then I think, like I say, they had enough chances to win it. And, again, Van Dijk could have been walking away with the match ball. He had that many chances. And I just thought the performance collectively was just, whilst it wasn't pleasing on the eye, at least they created the chances and they kind of had that opportunity to bail themselves out. And, it was similar against West Ham. They couldn't buy that second goal in midweek, but they were resilient and obviously, a bit fortuitous to kind of get away with that, the penalty and obviously the Milner block at the end on Souček. But at the end of the day, they got over the line and it was another 3 points. And And it was the same against City. I know they didn't have a great deal of chances, but they had a few. Obviously, they kind of rode their luck with VAR as well. So to get those 2 wins and who are, you'd say, are far more difficult opponents than Nottingham Forest, in all due respect, and it just kind of feels like it's being the story of Liverpool's season to take 1 step forward and then take 2 back, and obviously now they've got the game against Leeds United, who are again a team who you wouldn't really know what to expect. You'd expect Liverpool to beat them, but we've seen that they can beat Chelsea. I know that was at home. They've got a tough game away at Ajax as well. Then they got to go to Tottenham, haven't they, at the start of November? Which again, under Conte, they didn't win there last year, did they? That was a mental game. So you'd expect probably more of the same, and you just got to hope that one of these players do come back, that Liverpool can maybe turn the tide a bit. But like I say, while it is probably an adequate excuse, I don't think it makes up for kind of in the manner which they're losing these games, which is they just seem to have such a soft underbelly at the moment.
Yeah, you mentioned it feeling like Liverpool have been taking 1 step forward and sort of 2 steps back, and that was really what it felt like on Saturday. And obviously, the nature of the Premier League is that the away games are going to come just as often as the home. So, how much of an impact is sort of when you combine this poor away form with obviously what's become basically a selection merry-go-round at this point? How much of a struggle is that having on Jurgen Klopp's ability to get his side into a bit of rhythm?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think everyone was obviously gutted with the news that Thiago wasn't, available yesterday. But I think as well, Nunes was a massive miss, especially kind of when you look at the chances and kind of the amount of balls that went into the box. And it kind of felt like a game that, maybe would have been one where it would have really highlighted that kind of different option that he has given Liverpool. Obviously, it was a fantastic header to kind of get the goal on Wednesday evening. And you would have felt that there was more of the same to come yesterday. Like I say, Van Dijk had a few aerial chances. At the end, the goalkeeper comes up. But even just, the fact of, regardless of whether he would have scored aerially or not, the fact just to get him momentum and get him rhythm. Obviously, he came off the bench against City last weekend and put a good cameo in. Obviously, started against West Ham. He started against Rangers the week before. And it felt like it was really building up for Nunes now, especially with the injuries of Jota and Diaz. It felt like, right, this is kind of his stage. He's got a favourable fixture list, until the World Cup. Obviously that game against Tottenham was probably the hardest one. But then, for him to miss out, which, again, it could have been far worse if his hamstring injury, it seems like it's only going to keep him out of yesterday's game and not kind of beyond that. But it just was a real, again, it was a story of Liverpool's season. Even as a collective, they can't kind of put one foot in front of the other and make a few yards, and then individuals as well with injuries. I mean, Diogo Jota as well obviously gets the injury last weekend against City, and just as kind of Liverpool were coming into that new formation, that 4-2-4 or 4-4-2, kind of whatever you kind of view it as, and then obviously now he was kind of the nucleus of that in terms of his off the ball efforts and stuff, and now for him not to be available for what's going to be a couple of months, Jurgen Klopp said, is again another huge blow. So it kind of feels like it is going to be going back to the drawing board in the coming days and weeks. Like I say, the only kind of thing that does work in their favour is obviously this World Cup break, which I don't think anyone would have foreseen in the summer. I think everyone thought it was going to be a hindrance to kind of anything Liverpool were going to do well this season, but with that break and obviously a few favourable games beforehand, I think they've obviously got Leeds, they've got Southampton, and Tottenham as well. You'd expect Liverpool to apart from the Tottenham game, to pick up maximum points. So it's, that's kind of the silver lining from this now, is that they have got a lot of those big games out of the way. Obviously, I know they should have played Chelsea, they didn't, but they've played Everton, they played United, they played Arsenal, they will play Tottenham. So then going into that second half of the season, you've kind of got most of those games at home. Obviously, you've got the trip to City in April, I think it is, but that's the only kind of silver lining of this poor run of form, is that if Liverpool can, kind of regroup during the winter break, and they kind of go again, most of those big games will be at Anfield, which obviously we know over the years, during Jurgen Klopp's time, Liverpool tend to kind of win those games, and you've just got to hope that they can kind of just put this kind of torrid form behind them.
Yeah, you mentioned obviously Nunes was a massive miss yesterday, but another player that was missing for a large part of the game. Were you surprised to see James Milner picked over Trent Alexander-Arnold? Obviously, it was understandable for the City game with Trent having picked up a knock and obviously Milner offering a bit more defensively. But I would have thought Trent maybe would have been the obvious choice for a game where Liverpool are expected to go to the City ground and dominate possession, and he could create some more chances for Liverpool.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, it was an interesting one. To be fair to Milner, before the City game, obviously everyone knew that Trent was going to be out. I don't think anyone expected him to be on the bench, and certainly not. Everyone kind of knew that he wouldn't be starting that game. I said, after I think it was at halftime in the Arsenal game, I said I would have probably started Gomez. And obviously, Trent gets the injury, and obviously Gomez now required at centre half. Obviously because Canate was injured, so it did kind of like reshuffle the next few games, but. I thought Milner was obviously brilliant against City, and he did well against West Ham when he came on. But like you say, in a game where Liverpool do have most of the ball, and it is going to be kind of a backs to the wall performance from Forest in terms of just a low block, compact defensive kind of performance. You thought that would have maybe suited Trent a bit more than games where potentially Liverpool on the counter or whatever. But then I suppose the flip side of that is obviously when you have so much of the ball, which, I looked earlier and Liverpool are averaging about 60% possession away from home, which, and you think of the United game, the Arsenal game, those kind of games where Trent has suffered and, maybe more high profile than a lot of his other teammates. That has been because Liverpool have had a lot of the ball and maybe have been caught in those high and wide positions. So I can potentially understand that in the sense of, we saw how Forest's goal came, it was sloppy play from Joe Gomez, but that was kind of the nature of how Steve Cooper set his side up. It was to just hit Liverpool on the break, and maybe he thought that Milner would have given him a bit more defensive stability in terms of, he's not going to bomb 30 yards further forward and maybe get caught in possession. But I mean, certainly looking back at it now, you could think with the amount that Liverpool did have possession, it would have maybe suited someone like Trent. But then saying that, I think Milner set up two of Van Dijk's free headers, so it kind of tells you everything that again Liverpool did have enough to win the game. I don't think it was, whilst it wasn't a vintage performance, I don't think it was necessarily personnel in terms of it was just a weird game. It was the game at Arsenal similarly earlier in the month. I thought Liverpool were unlucky there yet again. The history books won't tell you that, but there's a contentious penalty for Arsenal. There's one that's not given for Liverpool. There's a goal after 50 seconds. It kind of just had everything, and again, almost seemed to just sum up Liverpool's struggles this season.
Yeah, and some of these struggles this season, I've seen a lot of talk being put down to have teams figured Liverpool out a bit, and I just wanted to get your thoughts on that. How much stock you'd put into that, and whether Jurgen Klopp's system has been. People have been watching over the past couple of years. People have seen the heavy metal style of football, and they're figuring out ways to combat it. And maybe like teams like Forest, are able to resist far easier away from home when they're not, faced with a baying Anfield crowd. Could that sort of explain a bit of the recent away struggles?
It could do, and I think Klopp asked about this a few weeks ago, and he basically said that teams have long figured us out, but we've been a level above them. So even if they do know what we're doing, it's almost impossible to stop. Which obviously I think it is true. I think we saw at the back end of last season as well, which I think a lot of people maybe referenced to like fatigue at the time, but I think at the derby at Anfield, that was a very contentious 45 minutes. It was very tight. And Andy Robertson gets the opening goal in about 65 minutes, I think it was. So it's not as if Liverpool's struggles were exclusive to this season. Obviously they kind of did limp over the line last season, but obviously kind of when you have that momentum of winning every single week or 3 times a week in the case that Liverpool were, obviously that generates greater momentum than kind of Liverpool are doing at the moment. I think it certainly is an interesting one, and maybe perhaps suggests why Klopp has gone into this 4-4-2, 4-2-4, 4-2-3-1 formation that we've been seeing in recent weeks, and that has kind of kicked off this revival. And obviously it kind of was stifled yesterday at Forest, but again, the personnel missing Thiago, it felt like it would have been a perfect game for him with the amount of red shirts he had in front of him. It was, just seemingly impossible to, for Fabinho, Harvey Elliott, Carvalho to kind of break down that low block. But in terms of figuring Liverpool out, like I say, it'd be interesting to kind of see when Klopp's got a fully fit squad, what he does, because I think everyone had kind of signalled the end of the 4-3-3 towards the end of last season. And, with the personnel coming in and the new striker coming in, I think everyone thought we would see the 4-2-3-1, but it wasn't used in pre-season at all, which was, obviously maybe because it was a shorter pre-season, maybe he didn't have the time. We know how kind of rigorous, Klopp's tactical setup is. It's not something you can kind of master in 4 weeks. And maybe Klopp took the decision that, we'll kind of stick with what we know, get the new lads settled in. And then maybe it's, I don't know, during the winter break or something they just kind of work on over the season. and then maybe implement next season when the likes of Nunes are settled in and, are accustomed to the league and accustomed to the country and, living away and all that kind of factors, which I think people don't necessarily, think about, stuff that goes on beyond the pitch, which obviously does impact performance. But it's a shame because, like I say, that the formation switch in recent weeks, with Jota being the heart of that, really feel like Liverpool had turned a corner. And, I know the game against City wasn't exactly how Liverpool have been playing in recent years. It wasn't the heavy metal football we've all been used to. But, it felt like they almost went back to basics with that formation. It was just everyone to a man was disciplined. Everyone did their jobs. It didn't seem too, expansive or, to do anything too expressive. And then obviously we see how the goal comes about, kind of doing what so many teams have done to Liverpool this season. But it's hard to say. I think it is hard to say whether teams have figured Liverpool out, because I think it would have perhaps come sooner. Again, I've said it a few times this season. It does feel like a bit of a sloppy excuse, but I do wonder how big of an impact the collective hangover from last season is having. Do you know what I mean? Because I think it's one thing, teams figuring you out if you're playing well, and that's a fair. Fair assumption to make then. But I think at the moment we're not seeing Liverpool even at 70% of what they're capable of. So I think to make the comparison then to whether teams have all of a sudden teams like Forest, who only played Liverpool once in the last 23 years, for them to have maybe figured Liverpool out, I think is a bit of a stretch. But like I say, I'm sure kind of after the World Cup and kind of when we head into 2023, I'm sure we'll get a better idea as to what Klopp's Liverpool will look like in the second phase, almost, whether it is a this 4-3-3 we stick with, or whether it's a 4-2-3-1 or whatever. But I think it's certainly hard to kind of make that judgment at the minute.
Yeah, looking ahead to those next away fixtures, then it might get worse before it gets better for Liverpool, with obviously Spurs away next, followed by then it's the World Cup, after which it's Villa and Brentford. Obviously, I'm not going to ask for any post-World Cup predictions, because who knows what the footballing landscape's going to look like at that point. But Spurs on the 6th of November, it's not an ideal place to be going looking for your first away win of the season, is it?
No, it's certainly not. And I think, I think I told the other week, Spurs had their best, start to a Premier League season ever, and kind of seeing what Conte's done. I think it's very similar to Klopp in terms of, after he took over last season and kind of once he's had that full pre-season that he had in the summer, he's really put like his kind of stamp on that Spurs team, and he's, seemingly got them all playing for one another. And, I think obviously while the likes of Arsenal and City will obviously get the credit, I think, apart from recent weeks, I think they have been, good value. So that will no doubt be a difficult game. It'll be an intense game. I referenced a game earlier last December, which was just absolutely wild. I think, Liverpool could have probably been 3 down in 25 minutes. Yeah, so I haven't seen a team cut through Liverpool like that in a long time. So, it'll certainly be, an interesting place for Liverpool to try and get their first, win of the season. Like we said, they've had, lesser games this season where you thought they would have got off the mark. Like we said, the game at United, okay, you can lose to United, I think, any year. Obviously, last year was obviously a complete freak what happened. The game at Everton, again, history will tell you that, Liverpool and under Jurgen Klopp, and even under, previous managers, a draw at Goodison always feels like the normal result. But it's kind of been the games either side of that against the newly promoted teams that, Liverpool will really be kicking themselves. But, you'd hope, like I say, that, they can get the win in Ajax, or you could get against Ajax even on Wednesday evening. And then obviously they can hopefully kick on against Leeds, at the weekend. And then all of a sudden you're looking forward to that game at Tottenham, sandwiched between the visit of Napoli. And you're thinking, if you can't get yourselves up for those games with kind of what's riding on it, it feels like Liverpool really do need to put, again, how many times we've said it so far this season, but they do need to put a string of results together between now and the World Cup to really kind of, I think if Liverpool are going into the World Cup with, potentially 5 or 6 points off, fourth, I think everyone will probably take that, given how poor the season started. If you can, it looks like a pretty impossible task to top the group in the Champions League, given the thrashing that Napoli gave us. So to kind of overturn that, but if you qualify for the Champions League with a game to spare almost, which I think a win at Ajax will do, all of a sudden the landscape looks a lot healthier than it did a couple of weeks ago, and even like it does today. So I think obviously it's a pivotal few weeks, and obviously kind of finishing off with that away game at Tottenham. So you just got to, fingers crossed that they can produce a performance, and hopefully it's, if they get the chances like they do yesterday, I'm sure another day they probably put 2 or 3 of those away. It was, just didn't fall to Liverpool yesterday, and another aspect that might help is I know Tottenham sit deep, but they do like to have the ball. So that might help, make it more of an open-ended game than potentially Liverpool just knocking on the door for 75, 80 minutes and then, getting punished, probably deservedly at the other end for not taking their chances.
Yeah, as you say, a big few weeks coming up for Liverpool in their build-up to that World Cup before the big break. But that is all we've got time for today on the agenda. Keifer, thanks for joining me. And from myself and from Keifer, it's goodbye for now.